Hello and welcome to Genealogy Quick Start. Again, we have two amazing quick starts for you today, and we have an extra special guest for you today. I do not know if you know Jill Morelli, but if you haven't, you're going to know her today. First off, who am I? What am I doing here? I'm Shabelle Jordan, and I am your host at Genealogy Quick Start. Today, there's just two things that I want you to do. One, stop and thank your ancestors for giving you life. Two, thank your ancestors for giving you something to do, right? What would you be doing if you weren't doing genealogy? I think about that often because there would be a gaping hole of time in my life if I stopped doing genealogy, which is never gonna happen. Guess what? Are you subscribed to Genealogy Quick Start's newsletter? Did you know we had a newsletter? We send it out a couple times a month to let you know about the show. And guess what? If you're here, you know that we want to know where you are from, whether you're watching live or recorded, and also your genealogy group. I'm always dying to know which genealogy groups you're a member of. So, what are we talking about today? We have two, not that. We're going to talk about that, but we have two great quick starts for you today. One is called um, something that I learned. So, let me tell you some learnings. Podcasts. You got to listen to podcasts. So, I was listening to a podcast about mistakes that we make and how we can make better mistakes or we can cut back on mistakes. And you know what they said? The thing that we are so used to that we think we can do in our sleep is the thing that we make mistakes on. And guess what thing that we all do? Census records. We love census records. But guess what? There's so many things that we might miss because we think, oh, I know everything. Jim and Michael have a great quick start for you today where they're going to talk about don't omit the census oddities, where they're going to show you all this little stuff that questions that you might not know about. And our special guest, Jill Morelli, is going to talk about getting on board the orphan train. Now, I've heard about orphan trains, but this one is really special. And wow, what Jill brings to this research is amazing. And she's going to share all these great tips with you. So let me go ahead and bring on my favorite guys. They're probably your favorite guys. I hear all the time. Oh, I love the columnist editor, Jim Beidler. And they also say they absolutely adore genealogy tip of the who are you?
Genealogy tip of the cone head.
Conan, yeah. This is a wooden shoe for anybody that was wondering what that was.
I
Yes.
was wondering. Thank
Yeah,
you.
we got to kind of mix it up a little bit today.
So census records, we hang out in census records all the time. You guys weren't always these, mega premier genealogists here. There were times where you might not have known as much as you know today. Have you ever had any census wows in your research?
Well, I had a census vow. Wow. Pretty much my first big time out doing genealogy. I was at the State Library of Pennsylvania. This is back in the census on microfilm era. And I went through the 3 rolls of the 1850 census for Berks County, just from beginning to end, just my first exposure to those every name censuses. And I came across one of my great grandfathers, Wellington Mockmer. We've talked about him before. Well, he was in the 1850 census as a 9/12 of a year old child. And what made that special to me is I only knew him from pictures of him as an old man because he lived into his 90s. So this was his first census. And until the 1950 came out, he was on every one of the every person in the household censuses from 1850 through 1940.
Nice. Oh, wow. That's very nice. That's very nice. Michael, did you have any census wows? It is really cool to see your ancestors as little people.
It is, but my wow has nothing to do with little people. I guess it kind of does indirectly. It was a couple I was researching in Chicago, and in 1920 they were living as husband and wife and listed all the children as his, but there was one minor teeny itty bitty problem. She was not even yet divorced from husband number one. And they lived in it. They moved to a different part of the city where no one knew them, and their entire 1920 census, not all of it, but a significant chunk of it, is an outright lie. The relationships of the children to the head of the household is a lie. Their birthplaces are fudged to make it look like they were his. Everything is there. His name and her name are right. His full name is right. His enumeration is correct, but everything else is a hot mess to make it look like they were his kids and they were married at the time, but they were not.
Can we just say it's not factual? Do we have to use the L word?
L word. I'm going to go with it. We just not right lie, but that's just me. But it took a while to figure that out because I'd never seen one where I'd seen ages off and a few minor details off, but I'd never seen one where the whole thing was just a hot mess of lies. Because it affected when you looked for divorce records and everything else based on you thought that enumeration was correct, and it wasn't.
Well, my census wow wasn't actually mine. It was the steam coming off of my cousin Floyd's head when I think it was the 1940 or the 1950 census came out. And we went on and we were looking at it together. And I believe the scenario was the head of the household was correct, but all the children's names were wrong. Like he was so mad. He was so mad. He was like, they thought this was a joke. This is serious stuff. He really got in his car. He got in the car and drove to his Uncle Bud's house to show it to him and asked his Uncle Bud, like, what was happening. Like, he was so mad. I was like, calm down. Don't arrest Uncle Bud, okay? So, guys, this is going to be fun. Let's take a look at what we're going to do today. This quick start is don't omit the census oddities.
And don't omit calling out all our fans who
have. Yes, thank you. I get so excited
those.
for the quick start. Who do we have here today? Let's see. Who's first? Oh, we have a new first person from Tulsa. Hello, Oklahoma. Hi, Michelle Bates. My genealogy roots. Love it. Hello, Katie. Katie, let's not talk about the rain. There's actual water coming down in my bathroom. Like I just saw that when I went to wash my glasses. Okay, we'll keep going with the show. Hello, Bobby Christian from Granite Bay, California. Uh-oh, we have the West Coast coming in. Jessica from Lansing, Michigan. How are you, Jessica? Jonna Walden from Lexington, Kentucky. I have to get to Kentucky just talking about that. Camp Nelson is a dream of mine. Got to get to Camp Nelson. Judy from Chicagoland. How are you? Oh my goodness, Paula Moen. Where have you been, girl? Where have you been? From Deptford. And we have another Kentucky in here, Kentucky Genealogical Society. Hi, Janet. Erwin from Delaware. You're getting blown around too. Delaware Augs in the house. Thank you for representing, Erwin. Hello, Janine Kengla, I think, from Grants Pass, Oregon. I love Oregon. Are you part of that forum that they have out there? I hung out with the Oregon Forum. Thank you so much for being here. And are we ready now for Don't Omit the Census Oddities? So just so that you know, Jim and Michael, I do hear from people that they really enjoy your census quick starts. They can never get enough of the quick starts.
I thought you were going to say sense of humor for a minute, but knew better.
Don't push it, Michael. Don't push it.
All right. So moving on to first step. What I actually don't have. I don't know why it's not here, but step one is to actually pick a census year, right? So pick anyone. And we have some extra special ones that we're doing here today. I think we do most of them. I think we just missed the earlier, like very, very early ones, because those ticks, you guys talked about the ticks.
Right.
So just think of a census year. And then step 2 is to read the column headings, all of them. So sometimes you can't see them, so they look blurry. So what are you supposed to do about that?
Or you can usually, if you go to Google and type in 1850 census headings, U.S. Whatever, you'll get a page that will show you what they were in clear, legible type. That's for some of the more obtuse ones, arcane state censuses. That's usually what I do when I can't read those headings. Is I just do a Google search for column headings, whatever year, whatever state, and I usually find a page that has that. But for federal censuses, that's real easy to do, and that will tell you what those column headings are, because the whole point of this is to look at every heading on the census. Don't just ignore the ones that have ticks or things checked, thinking I don't need to know that, because there can be some significant clues in those non-name, non-birthplace columns.
Yeah, and make sure that whether you're using Ancestry or MyHeritage or what have you, that you're not just relying on the printed summary, that they spit back to you from a
Oh,
search,
Yes.
but that you click on the actual image. I know this is kind of genealogy 101 to most of us, but
but it's
but
important.
yeah, and it's tempting to just, oh yeah, there it all is. Yeah, but well, there it all is that somebody has typed up. But click to that image, go through, from, like Michael says, all the way to the right, and look at the wealth of information that there could be there.
Because if you're
So
not
what?
looking at a
Okay.
handwritten image, you're not looking at the original.
Yes,
Just,
handwritten
I mean,
image.
that's the takeaway from all that. It's
Yeah,
if it's typed, it's not the
yeah.
original.
Yeah,
So let
yeah.
me go
And,
ahead.
well, and just to say that the headings are all pre-printed now. In the early censuses, that some of the tick mark censuses, they don't even have printed headings. They have printed headings for all the 1850 and forward full name censuses.
And I like to think of it as when I do this at work for people, when, I was sitting at work, we're bored, and we're like, hey, I'm going to look up your people. When you know about these column headings that aren't the general ones, it almost feels like you're reading tarot cards. Like they were married, they were first married here, or they had a farm. People are like, wait a minute, how do you know all this stuff? So it's really the little minutia. So let's get into that. So we have read all the column headings. And so now we're going to move on to step 3, which is to read the census instructions. Where do we get these instructions and why are they important? I just need to know where they were born, right? What?
That's true. No, the NARA website. There's other websites that have the PDFs of the census instructions. If you just Google, I'm fading out there. If you just Google 1900 U.S. Census instructions, that's probably going to be one of the first pages that comes up. Is those instructions that the enumerator was supposed to follow when he asked questions and when he got answers and put them in on the census form. There's instructions for all the U.S. censuses. It's helpful to read those. Now, did once in a while they not follow directions? Sure, just like your children. But it's important for you to know what
Not
they
your
are.
children, Michael. I
No,
think your children
absolutely.
were quite perfect.
Well, on days ending in a 2. But anyway, um, you want to read those so you have an idea what was going on, because that if they're following them, that can explain answers that you might think are a little off or a little weird based on what the question, the instructions were. You've got to know what those were.
All right. So we are getting all the questions, headings, and reading them. Now we're learning what the instructions are telling us. Step 4 is to interpret the information. So you guys have some great examples. Did you want me to go to that now, or did you want to talk about interpreting?
I think you can just go to those now if you want.
Okay. So first
Probably.
example that you have, you guys never, here we are for the first example.
Okay, I think I'm going to take the glasses off. This one is one of mine. This is a 1930 census from Chicago, and this one is partially correct. The stepchildren are all stepchildren. One of the things, though, this has an age at first marriage. You see that
I
21
love that
and
column,
15.
21 and 15.
And what I do with these, this is the 1930s, the year that asked this. Look and see if it backtracks to because their age now, the age they got married should be how long they've been married. Make certain that's the same number for both the husband and the wife. That can be one way to get a clue that there somebody had been married before.
Before,
If
yes.
those if those times of marriage don't aren't consistent. Now, what this couple did, you will notice there are stepchildren there, and they look like they were married to each other the whole time based on those ages and those years of first marriage. They were not married that whole time. He did not marry her when he was 21. He married her when he was in his late 30s. Um, so they can always lie. The other thing to keep in mind, though, with this is he might have been married to somebody else when he was 21, not necessarily
Yes.
the wife in the census enumeration. So you want to keep that in mind. But look at those ages of this is from 1930 and see what they tell you about were these married to each other or might there have been something else going on. The stepchildren is a big clue to that as well. Not really in the topic of our conversation about looking at those headings, but there's the stepchildren are 20, 18, 15, 17, and 1 year and 6 months. So there's something going on there because
Yeah.
there's a real big gap. So, and it's Lillian's daughter. Marielle is Lillian's daughter.
Okay.
That's not made clear in the census, but when you're looking at that, they're all stepchildren, and boom,
Yes.
there's that 15, 16-year age gap there. Your genealogy bell should be going ding a ding a
Ding,
ding a
ding,
ding,
ding.
trying to figure that out.
Love it. Next example. This one is
This is my
1920.
grandmother. Yes, Dora Etchberger Beidler, and she's at this point she's now the oldest one in the family because she had one older brother who died in a farming accident, and we're again recommending you go all the way to the right, and you see she's no longer in school. She's only 15. A year and a half later, she'll be married and having a kid. So she's already out of school, but her younger siblings are in school. So I find that interesting, and also that they're renting a farm. If you go over to the father's line to above her, they're renting. It's a farm, and
And what can you do with that farm information, Jim?
well, you might be able to track down who they were renting from, and track down the farm where the farm is at. Yeah.
Love it. Love it.
That's probably good. If they're renting that, isn't that typically kind of hard? I know here that's kind of difficult to do that.
I'm not saying it's easy.
Right. Unless there's trying to think, unless one thing to do though is to look at the neighbors and look at the neighbors that are landowners to kind of get a feel for where in the township or the whatever the census district was, where within that district they might have
Right.
lived.
Right.
Give you
Now,
a starting point.
and the final thing on it says number on farm schedule. There were 98 on the farm schedule. Now, I don't know. I'll be honest. I don't know whether those farm schedules have been preserved or whether they were pitched. But
I think
they were pitched, Michael? Okay.
Pitched.
Because if they were preserved, sometimes tax lists and censuses will have rent. It will have who the renter is renting from. So, just a thought.
Just a thought. All right. Next up, 1900.
Yeah, this is just a random one that I pulled. 1900, 10, and 20. They have these intriguing columns: the year of immigration to the United States, the number of years in the United States and whether they're naturalized or still an alien, or whether they've taken out papers. And it is interesting how many times, it should be a pretty simple subtraction. The number of years they're in the country minus the census year ought to give you the year of immigration, but those don't always match up. And when they don't, then you've got more data to look for. You've got more ideas on or a range of time that you need to look for passenger lists. So
I love these columns here.
yeah, these I mean, this, and when we were I know when we were talking about this show, Michael said, well, doesn't everybody know about those? Well, I'm surprised at how many times when I ask somebody, well, have you when they're like, oh, I don't know when they came over. Well, have you looked at the 1900 census? Oh, yeah.
The one thing also to remember about those is they provided no documentation for that year or that length.
No, it's whatever they said.
Right, whatever they said. And if the length of time ends in a 0 or a 5, sometimes it makes me, we're laughing, but you might have thought, oh, I think I've been about 30 years ago. I can't remember. Why the hell are you asking me? So the ones that are more specific, it kind of would lead me to believe, of course, you could lie to be accurate, whatever. But when they ended a 0 or a 5, I kind of wonder, was that accurate, or was that just a little bit? Was that a guesstimate? But you don't know.
No, that's really a great strategy. That's like when I used to be looking at obituaries when I was working newspapers, and I'd see a name that kind of looked like a typo, and then I'd look at my keyboard and see if what I thought the name should be was one letter off from the keyboard. I'm like, yeah, I bet that's a typo.
Judy is asking us about these numbers by this top janitor that's above the top janitor, these errant kind of like notations. Do you know what that is?
I do not. Michael, do you know? My speculation is that they're something to do with occupational codes.
It's either either that, or it's how many in the household and who the head of the household is. I will make a note that we're going to look at those. I'm going to call them the dash numbers.
Yeah, they're kind of interesting.
Because at one point in time I knew, but right off the top of my head, I can't remember. But I want to say it could be something with how many are in the household.
And both janitors have a 4-6.
That could be true. Notice the other one has some other numbers in the upper right of that as well.
All right, moving on, because genealogist rabbit hole. Here we go. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Judy. Yeah. Next one.
Judy keeps us honest. So
that's true. This is an 1870 census. This one asks, were the parents of foreign birth? That's those you see in those tick marks on the right-hand side, because all these people had parents that were immigrants there. So we're getting that clue if we didn't already know that. And then married within the census year, the couple at the top that are highlighted, he's 25 and she's 27, something like that. They were married in November, and a neighboring couple was also married in October.
Oh, okay. There we are. So you're saying all these that are in the middle,
with all those tick marks,
and parents with foreign birth,
right? In the 4th and 5th columns from the end there, those are all parents of foreign birth.
Wonderful. All right, let's move on to the next one. What do we have here?
This one is kind of an anomaly. This is from the 1860 census. The bottom two, I want to talk about the circle on the right first. Okay. That indicates that those individuals were married within the census year. The odd thing is, if you go over to the other circle, it appears to indicate they are both female.
And they were doing it back in Missouri. Well, okay, no,
there's my speculation. We want to keep in mind when we look at these census records, we're not looking at what the guy took from house to house. We're looking at the cleaned up version that went to the Bureau of the Census. So it's possible he made some errors when he did this in one way, shape, or form? I know you can't even imagine it. I do know the Matilda down there. I know she's the daughter of Wesley and Cyrilda. I know that. And Matilda did get married in 1859. I've got the marriage record, and we think that's actually William written above there. It's an WM is an abbreviation for William.
Okay.
Census taker couldn't read his notes, and he wrote down Jane. He thought Jane was female. Why he still put they were married in the census year, I don't know. So this is another one of the, you want to transcribe it exactly as it's written. We always want to do that, and then go from there with other records. But this is another census that asks if they were married within the census year. So you've got that clue. That can be helpful in states that didn't keep marriage records during that time period. Like I think it begins with a P and ends with an A, if memory serves. I'm not talking about paw. But that can be helpful. Or in counties where there are burn counties and you don't have the marriage records, those can be helpful too. But this one is a little bit strange. Based on that Jane, using that in quotes, because I think it's a William. If you think about the WM and the lines they would write under that when they abbreviated that back in the day, I'm thinking when the guy went to write up his good copy, he couldn't read it 100%. And of course, he's not going to go back to the household and get clarification. He's going to write something down because nobody's going to look at these things in 100 years anyway. and
no one's going to care.
No one's going to care. But so those columns can be, as we've seen, they can be very informative if you take a look at them.
So those are amazing interpretations. Any other types of census interpretations, oddities that you might want to share before we move on?
Too many.
Too many. All right. So let's look at the final step, which was to wash, rinse, and repeat. Love that. There's some gremlin came in here while I was taking a nap and removed all the steps. So let's go through the steps. Of course, step 1 is to pick a census year. Step 2 is then to read the column headings, all of them. Step 3 is to read the census instructions, which you can get by Googling. And then step 4 is to interpret the information, follow, and then repeat with your next census.
I would add, if you've analyzed it and you think it's incorrect, separate from your transcription of that, with documents and sources, write up what you think is incorrect about that enumeration, if it is incorrect.
Yeah, so you don't have to keep saying, wait a minute, is this blah, blah, blah? You said transcribe multiple times. Where are you transcribing? How are you doing this?
I transcribe mine in Word, but you can you put them in your notes in your software. I transcribe them in Microsoft Word, whatever works for you. But I like to transcribe them because that forces me to look at each piece of information, and I notice more things when I do that. I just don't take Ancestry's transcription and upload it into my database without looking at it myself. That's just me.
And that's why you find all the really cool stuff, Michael. Michael, thank you so much for the oddities. We have oddities. I was going to say something, but I won't. Thank you so much. See you guys. All right, let's get ready for our special guest. 1 second. So today we have an amazing pleasure to have a woman that I anticipate I'm going to be spending more time with, Jill Morelli. So in the genealogy world, we run into each other, we know each other's names, but this is really the first time I've gotten a chance to really hang out with Jill, and what a special lady. Jill, welcome to Genealogy Quick Start. How are you today?
I am fine. Thank you so much for inviting me.
So, Jill, we asked this of all of our special guests. We want to know your genealogy origin story. How did you get started? And when did you know, lights out, I'm hooked, that's it?
Well, I started decades ago. I'm a roots genealogist, and so I was very inspired by Alex Haley's story of Kunta Kinte, and I got very excited about it. And I started doing paper genealogy, which was just writing letters, putting it down on paper, and that sort of thing. I took about a 20-year break to raise my daughter. And in 2002, when she was off to college, I said, gee, I wonder what I'm going to do now. And I bought myself a genealogy program, and I went at it with a vengeance, and I have not stopped since.
Oh my goodness. Yes, that I could see that. I could see that. Your time opened up and you just filled it with genealogy.
That's right. But there were bad times too. I remember trying to enter information into the software and I threw the book across the room. So,
Oh no.
yeah.
You
So there's
recovered.
been challenges along the way.
So speaking of challenges, you set yourself up for a really challenging research project here. Orphan train. So today you're going to talk about your quick start is called Getting on Board the Orphan Train. So
Right.
can you tell us first about what do you mean when you say orphan trains? When I first heard that, I thought Europe, World War II. I was not thinking about America. So can you enlighten us?
Sure. Between the years of 1854 and 1929, over 250,000 children were moved out of New York City that were orphans or partial orphans. That is that their parents gave them up, even though their parents were still alive. And they gave them to a variety of orphanages that were located in New York City. And then New York City moved the children out to where labor was needed, which was in the frontier. And so the frontier at that time was the Midwest. And so farmers needed to have primarily boys. They wanted boys. And so any child who was of an orphan or partial orphan, or parents had released them, was ushered onto the train and sent points west. Almost every state has some orphan trains. The further west you go, the fewer there are. The program stopped in 1929.
Okay. Just real quick, did they have orphan trains out of New Jersey? When you say every state, are you saying every state in the Midwest received orphan trains, or are you saying every state sent orphan trains?
No, the documents that I've read really only indicate that orphans came out of Boston, New York City, which had the largest number, and Chicago sent a few out as well, but not in as organized a manner as did New York City.
Okay. Expand the geographic area there. So, Jill, are you ready to do this quick start?
Take it away.
Let's jump on in. So we are getting we're getting on board the orphan train. So step one is to learn the story of the orphan train. So you just shared with us locations they came out of, where they went to. So we can, unless you had anything else the mini to add, we can move on to step two.
The only thing I would add is that orphan train as a terminology actually didn't come into existence until the early 1900s. I'm going to be talking about orphans from 1890, and they did not use that terminology at that time, but that's just a clarification.
No, that's a good one. That's a good one, because when you're searching for it, you might not find it.
You
Because
can't, pre-1900, you cannot search on orphan train and find any of the, I won't say any, but you're not going to be able to find as much information as you could if you're looking for something in using other terms.
And not to get like too deep, but what would you search on if you're looking for the 1800s?
I actually looked on the two things. I searched on the orphanage. In my case, was the Children's Aid Society. And the other one is they always had an agent go with them. And oftentimes the agent was mentioned in newspapers. And so in the case of my orphans, Eli Trott was the agent. And so I would search on Trott or Eli Trott, as well as Children's Aid Society.
So once you learn the story of them, you will have what the keywords are because you'll know
That's
who
right.
the players are, the locations, etc. All right. So we have step 1. We know the story.
Mhm.
Moving on to step 2, we want to talk about how to identify the orphan. So,
Not always easy.
okay.
Not always easy. So in my case, I had discovered that there were 46 orphans that came to Hamilton County, Iowa in 1890, in the fall of 1890. They were all unnamed. And I decided that their story needed to be told. And so I started looking at, I started trying to decide and to figure out what their names were. I've identified 35 of the 45. 46. And so the sometimes it's very easy. And I don't know if you want to go to that next slide or
Sure,
not.
sure. Let's first show these
Yeah,
beautiful children.
Yeah, this is the November delivery. The children were brought to Hamilton County in 3 deliveries, and this is the November delivery. And I just happenstance upon this photograph of these children before they got on the train in New York City. So this is them standing there in array right before they got on the train to come to Hamilton County.
Okay. Great picture.
Yeah, it is. So this is an example of the Children's Aid Society would tell the town that they were coming. The town would then organize a committee, and you can see the names there at the bottom. And then the committee would take applications for who would get a boy, because they thought they were going to get all boys. And and they would discern or make decisions about who was going to get one. They didn't know how many children would come. They were surprised in the first delivery they got 4 girls, and so but then the children would arrive in Hamilton County. They were brought to a large auditorium. They were put onto the stage. The agent, who was Eli Trott, introduced each one of the children, and then the farmers picked one.
Like an auction almost.
Like cattle. Yeah.
Like cattle. Okay.
Like cattle. Yeah, it really was. I can't imagine not being selected.
Are there any oral histories of any of these children?
Yes, there are. I just listened not too long ago to a podcast done in 1999 of the last living orphan train rider.
Wow.
And in that case, and she died 3 years later, so she didn't live too much longer than that. She was already in her 90s, since 1929 was the last delivery. So there are, in addition, there's a fair number of books written by like grandchildren about their grandmother or grandfather.
Okay.
My dilemma was, as I saw those, is that, like history is written by the victors, so are biographies written by the successful. And I was not convinced that if you took a cohort of orphans, that you would have 100% success stories.
Oh, sure.
And so I wanted to see if there was any patterns in my little kids that we have behind me. Over here, that we have behind me, that whether or not they were universally successful, or were they challenged, were there a number of them that were challenged. And unfortunately, the latter is true. We do not get books written by those who are not successful.
Correct. Let's see. The next slide. Is this one identifying, or is it moving on to the next?
It's identifying.
Okay, so let's take a look at this one.
Yeah, so sometimes it's really easy to identify them. In this case, Harry Bittner, who died when he was age 14, he was one of the New York boys brought to Webster City with several other children about 10 years ago. So sometimes it's just right there in the paper that he was. And so sometimes it's really easy to figure out. But there's always challenges. The children were always between the ages of 3 and 10. They were mine were all born in New York City, but not necessarily their parents. They rarely were adopted. The children were mostly foster children their entire lives, and as a consequence, we just it just makes it sometimes difficult. That was an easy one. The next one that you're going to show is a hard one.
Is a hard one. Let's look at the hard one.
Yeah. So in this case, we have Belle, and go to the next slide as well, because that's the enlargement. There we go. And you see Fred and Minnie there with Belle as a daughter. Well, Belle is not a daughter. Belle was an orphan train rider that arrived in October of 1890. She was on the October train. It's disguised so much that Minnie has even declared that she's had one child and that one child is living. And you might think that it's Belle, but it's not. Minnie had no children. There were no children in that family. And so you see that there's sometimes subterfuge, if you will, because there was such a stigma associated with these children. Yeah. On the other hand, you can see that Belle was born in New York, and her foster parents, Fred and Minnie, were both born in Germany. So that's a big key to me, is anytime I see someone born in New York who's living with folks who are not born in New York, that was my subset that I looked at for the 1900 census. And I just did a spreadsheet. I think I had something like 30 of them for Hamilton County. Okay. And I went through each kid step by step by step to see and do a brief biography to see whether or not they really could have been an orphan train rider.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you are really into these orphan trains. Is there something out there in that area where you guys just really dig into these projects that deal with youth? Because Birdie had the one dealing with the hearing impaired children, I believe.
Yeah, I just, it's, they just called my name.
So that's identifying. Are we ready to move on to the next step?
I think so.
All right. So we have some tips on how to identify newspapers, census records. And step 3 is to research their life upon arrival till death. So this is kind of like general genealogy research.
This exactly right. It's just going from life on the farm in Hamilton County, Iowa on. Now, the difficulties are, and I think I go into that in the next slide, that the challenges to continue the identification as you look and do your genealogy is that foster parents will often change the child's name from their New York City issued name. So you might find not just Belle. Belle had her surname changed, but she did not have her given name change. Okay. But the child might then revert to their New York City name when they became an adult, but you don't know what it is.
Right.
So they can disappear very easily. There's stigma, of course, but then the child's foster parents will also subsume identifiers like birth locations. Belle, a number of times, indicated that her parents were Fred and Minnie, and that she was born in Germany. So, so there's oftentimes just to make it easy on themselves, they just.
You're not going to call them liars, like
I'm not going to call them lies. No, I'm not even going to call them fake news. But to avoid the stigma, they did what they had to do.
Yes.
Now, a child could be a foundling, which is the child just appears on the orphanage's front step.
Yes.
And in that case, they don't have a name. They don't have an accurate birth date. They're probably not registered. The parents' names aren't identified. So you can't find out much about them prior to arrival. But if they stayed in the area, I can find them all the way to death. But there's a fair number of these kids who, at the time that they are 20 years old, change their name back to their New York name, and I can't find them.
Oh my goodness. I never thought of them changing, but that says how unconnected they were probably to their.
Right. A lot of them just served as servants, labor on the farm. You see kids who never attended school, even though they were supposed to,
Oh,
using all of those techniques that Jim and Michael talked about
yes.
earlier of making sure you look all the way to the right. But some of the primary resources that I could find were local newspapers, censuses. Iowa has terrific half-decade censuses.
Nice.
Interviewing descendants, probate records of foster parents. They're rarely given any, they're very, very rarely heirs.
Yeah, I was gonna. Okay, so if they have other children, then they might just be omitted. Okay.
Right. Or they're omitted and just said, my foster child, they don't get anything.
Wait,
So
they say that? Like they don't leave them out, they just say you're not getting anything?
well, a couple of times that I found that they're even mentioned in probate
wow.
records. One is mentioned and says that he's deceased. Another one is mentioned, and thank goodness he listed the name, the New York name of the child, so I could all of a sudden
Oh,
find her.
nice.
Unfortunately, she had been bugging the family for money, and the probate record basically said, we're going to give you $200 when I die, and that's it, and you can't bug our family anymore. So,
Oh
and
my.
she also spent the rest of her life in an insane asylum in Yankton, South Dakota.
Oh my. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness. What
very
a sad story.
sad stories. This is a different case right here. This is a letter that was written by a descendant, a grandchild, wrote the letter to the Children's Aid Society, and they sent her information about that was in the file about Clara Crone Corkenreither.
So they were just inquiring to get information.
They were inquiring and they got the information, but only descendants can get the file information. So I'm not a descendant of any of these children, so I can't get the file.
Okay. And there's no statute, like the time when they released those records?
It's a private company. It's a private orphanage. They're still in existence today in New York City, and they can make their own rules.
Oh, wow. So that must really be hampering your research in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it forced me to do all of the searching that I described. Find 35. I've established a new relationship with the orphanage, and I am hopeful that in 2024 they're going to release the basically passenger manifest for August and November, so I can identify these little boys over here. These kids.
Okay.
So
You have
I'm hopeful.
You have some more here?
I do. So, information from descendants. These were pieces of files that were by descendants. The woman with the child is Clara Crone. She was an orphan trained writer. The child is June Hoover, who wrote that letter that we just looked at.
Oh.
The letter that we have over on the right-hand side is Clara's mother attesting that Clara was adopted. Clara was never adopted. And so she's attesting it. So from that perspective, I suspect the court viewed Clara as being adopted into the family. She actually inherited some land from her mother upon the death of her mother. The item in the upper left-hand corner is a little slip of fabric that would be clipped on the inside of a child's coat that would say the name, the New York City name, and when they were born. And in this case, it also says who the child was to be delivered to. And this is a special request list for a child. And so the Children's Aid Society agreed to send a child. And so they did. They sent this child to Mason City, Iowa. And that child kept this little piece of.
Oh my gosh, that is precious.
I know. It's the only one I've ever found. I found it in a Genealogical Society newsletter. I contacted them. The original is in the Orphan Train Depot out of Concordia, Kansas, which is the National Clearinghouse.
So this is a like a photograph of the fabric that was inside.
It's a photograph of the fabric, but the original is kept in Kansas.
Oh my goodness, that is amazing.
Yeah, it is. Now I can't find this kid. Yules,
Oh.
Vigne. I can't find him. I have no idea who his parents are.
So that is continuing to more ways to research your life from arrival to death. Are we ready for step 4?
Yep.
All right. Step 4 is to research their life from birth to arrival.
Right.
Now that, oh, wow. So how are you doing that?
Well, it's really difficult. It'd be lovely if, someone would go to heaven and drop down that 1890 census. That would be really special. But without the 1890 census, I'm struggle because that was done in the summer of 1890. And so these children would have come in the fall of 1890. So they should have shown up in the orphanages, and
No one needs the 1890 more than you, Jill.
nobody
I thought we
needs
all
it more than
needed
I
it.
do.
No one needs it more than you.
So just months before they took to the train. But nevertheless, there is other ways. So of the 46, I found 35 of them.
Okay.
And of the 35, I've found a birth certificate for 10 of them, 5 boys and 5 girls. And if you go to the next slide, I can show you what one of those looks like. So here's George Breckfeld. You can see here that his parents were George Breckfeld and Mary Cusack Breckfeld. He was born in the New York Infant Asylum, which is a place where poor women would go to have children with the expectation that they would put their children up for adoption. And that particular one shows that this is the 7th child of this mother, of which 4 are living, of which George is one. George was an orphan train rider. He was put on the train, and he would have been 7 years old at the time. Another rabbit hole that I would love to go down is the fact that the attending physician is Kate Parker in 1885.
Oh, wow.
So the idea that there's a female medical
Indeed.
doctor in 1885 at the New York Infant Asylum taking care of these women is particularly interesting. But if you can find this, they're found on the New York City Historic Vital Records site, and they've only within the last 2 years been placed online, but they're limited in their coverage. So, for example, they don't have any of births in Staten Island. They cover the Bronx and Manhattan pretty well.
But you would have to know their original name.
You would have to know their New York name. The other thing I have done is I have searched for females born on a certain date.
Okay.
And so sometimes that works. Now, the search engines don't allow that, so you get a very long list. So then you just have to go through it one by one, manually to weed out the ones that weren't born on the right date. And then you have to research each one to see if they show up in the 1890s, in the 1900 census. Because if they show up in the 1900 census, then they're not your orphan train rider.
They're not your orphan train riders.
They're not yours. So there's this kind of look at each one, do a research on each one, see whether or not, and see if you can do it by elimination. Rarely can I be successful doing that.
Wow.
But I tried it anyway.
I'm praying for you in 1890 tonight. I'm serious. I have never known.
No, pray for these little kids. Pray for these kids. They're the ones who need the prayers.
And so, so looking for those vital records, checking the census just to make sure that they have moved.
Right.
Multiple ways to do that step, which is to search for their birth until their arrival there.
And you really can't find out too much between birth and when they left New York City because you just don't know. You assume that they were in the orphanage almost the entire time.
And then step 5, it's to write up your findings. So it looks like you're writing something.
I am. Journeys of the Forgotten, the Orphans of Hamilton County, Iowa of 1890. So I wrote it up as an article and I submitted it to two journals, and they both rejected it. So I decided, well, what the heck? I'll write a book instead.
Yay!
So I've taken each child, written their biographies, so they're each a chapter, and then I wrote the introduction and the front matter. I broke out each biography between, from arrival to death, and then back to try and find their birth certificate. I analyzed them because I wanted to know success stories or not. And it's about 50-50. They're
Okay.
50% get us qualify as successful, and another 50% don't. Go to prison, insane asylums, whatever it might be. Long bibliography, 4 or 5 pages of bibliography, and I have yet to do the index. So I've really got most of the book put together, but I'm going to be traveling the first quarter, so this isn't going to get written or published until
No, it'll be published at some
oh,
point.
it'll be published, but in the summer. Yeah, I want it off my desk. Summer is the best I can hope for.
Fantastic. Let's run through these steps for getting on board the orphan train. Step 1, learn the story of your particular orphan train. Step 2, how do you learn how to identify orphans? Step 3, research their life upon arrival until their death. Step 4, go through the daunting task of researching their life from birth to arrival, but Jill has some great tips for you. Step 5, write up the findings. Jill, that is absolutely amazing. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you for trying to tell their stories. Jim Beidler is just always, he was taking notes. I think I saw Jim taking notes because he is digging the orphan train. Thank you
Choo
so
choo.
much. Choo choo. Woo woo. All right, everyone. Thank you so much, Jill. Again, everyone, thank you for being here. And I think I have a song that you all want to hear. Take care.